Due to the nature of military service and the realities of the modern battlefield, we may never ever be able to escape the plague of what is veteran and soldier suicide. So I must ask you, as military leaders, are you comfortable with talking about the subject of suicide? Do you know what to do if a soldier expresses suicide ideations? Do you know the resources to supply a soldier with to help them if they find themselves in crisis? Stay tuned, for in this series of videos from the Evolving Warfighter, we will discuss several issues surrounding suicide in the modern military. Welcome to the Evolving Warfighter. My name is Dr. Franklin Annis, and I'm excited to announce a series of videos produced in partnership with the company leader concerning the topic of military suicide. Specifically, what we can do as leaders to better understand why individuals might become suicidal and how we might provide the resources to soldiers that keep them from committing suicide. The catalyst for this video came from my experience as a military officer and veteran. I, like many other soldiers, had the misfortune of having a soldier that was inside my ranks commit suicide. It also came from my experience working with the Nebraska Department of Labor, specifically with the homeless and disabled veterans that had a high risk of suicide ideation. In this video, I will discuss my top 3 recommendations for military leaders. My first recommendation is to avoid the use of cliché. My second one is to understand that thoughts of suicide may actually be a cry for freedom. And finally, do not wait until you have a suicidal soldier on your hands before you get trained for the proper suicide intervention techniques. My first recommendation for Army leaders is to avoid the use of truisms, platitudes, or cliches whenever possible when addressing the subject of suicide. While it is true the nature of military education system tends to overly simplify very complex and sometimes emotionally driven events, when this technique is applied to the topic of suicide, it may be detrimental. While it's nice to have quick slogans that portray very complicated items or tasks to be done, when we're dealing with suicide, we want to ensure that our caring or expression of concern is not removed. Think about it. How many times have you heard the phrase, "It takes the courage of a warrior to ask for help"? Or maybe the phrase, "Don't pick a permanent solution for a temporary problem." While these slogans may have truth, if they're repeated too many times, they start to be perceived as simply slogans, and soldiers fail to see the underlying message within. It's kind of like the phrase, "There's no use crying over spilt milk." It's been said so many times that the cliche almost bears no meaning at all. And sometimes it expresses a lack of concern when said. And this is what we want to try to desperately avoid if we're dealing with soldiers that are suicidal. We always want to make sure that they feel that our concern for them is genuine and that we're not just parroting some comment out of an annual training brief. With the exception of those that were suffering from suicidal thoughts due to a medical issue, and I'll address that situation in a later video in this series, almost everyone I've ever talked to that was truly suicidal was really making a desperate call for freedom. It's interesting that the human mind, if it sees no ability for the future to improve either the quality of life or the quality of relationships around them, may turn to thoughts of suicide. They're basically looking for an escape at that point. But freedom might be the key to solving this problem. A lot of times if we take a soldier that has suicidal thoughts and provide them resources or to demonstrate the fact that they can still make choices to make their quality of life better, even if it's by the most smallest step along the way, it will give them enough hope to turn away from suicidal thoughts. The thought of freedom being the key to avoid suicide might have been best expressed by the 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche in this quote: "The thought of suicide is of great consolation. By means of it, one gets successfully through many a bad night." Here he expresses that if we view suicide as a freedom and not an escape, it may actually provide hope for the future. So the thought of suicide itself may be a positive force, because if one views suicide as the last freedom you can execute, then surviving a very harsh or very cruel world becomes a choice. And if you're facing hardships as a free man, you are in a better situation than facing hardships as a slave. So the freedom to commit suicide may be the last defense against suicide itself, ironically. If we're facing a soldier that's truly expressing suicide due to the need of more freedom, it's important to focus on the fact that we need to allow them to make choices. It's not simple enough to improve their conditions by giving the homeless a house or the hungry the food, but we need to allow these individuals to become agents to make the choices and execute the freedoms to lead them to these end results. Therefore, as leaders, we need to allow our soldiers to make choices that we may not personally agree with, as long as they're still moving forward on the path of improving their own life. The lack of perceived freedom may be particularly damaging to both the veteran and service member community. Because it's not only a tragedy of the current situation they find themselves in, it's a violation of a core principle that they built their lives around. Most service members pride themselves on being a defender of freedom, and when they find themselves without any freedom, or what they perceive to be no freedom, it can be particularly damaging because it doesn't only hurt their current situation, it hurts their sense of self-identity. My final recommendation for this video is that leaders do not wait to get trained in suicide intervention until they have a suicidal soldier on their hand. The art of suicide intervention requires more skills than what is typically taught in the annual suicide awareness brief. Luckily, the Army has adopted the civilian-style assist training program. This is a 2-day course that will teach you the skills required to successfully do suicide interventions. If you have medical personnel inside your formations, I highly recommend that you also send these individuals to assist training so that they are well prepared to take care of your soldiers if ever you need them to. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the materials useful. If you'd like a written article that covers the same materials as this video, I invite you to look at the Company Leader website here. I also encourage you to subscribe to their Facebook page. They often produce and publish various different articles on topics connected to military leadership. Please subscribe to the Evolving Warfighter to see the future videos concerning this topic and other videos concerning the topic of military self-development. Finally, today I will leave you with a playlist of videos I have found useful to military leaders concerning the topic of suicide. As always, continue your self-development so we can ensure that we dominate the modern battlefield.